I have often heard, as you have, this expression, she looks just like you. Or, he's the image of his dad, when viewing a newly born baby. Maybe I'm not all there, but I have never been able to see resemblance in any. Which brings me to a question that I have been interested in all my life. And I am no nearer to the answer now than I ever was. That is, what part of the parentage what part does the parentage have to do with the child? From what I have observed and information I have been able to gather, my conclusion is very little. And whatever there seems to be can be traced to other facts. Physically, short parents may have tall children, or the opposite. Fleshy or stout parents have thin children, or thin and slim parents have the opposite in their children. Very talented or mentally outstanding parents may have backward children. Seldom does the child have the same brain capacity as the parent. This can be either above or below. Don't take this for a fact because I said so, but it is a fact which can be traced through available documents. During Hitler's reign of power in Germany, the term master race was often heard. They went so far as to make this a true fact that a breeding system was established whereby a big, intelligent officer was mated with an Amazon woman with equal mental capacity. Marital or family relationships of the subjects were not considered. They were drafted and placed in surroundings supposedly compatible for good relationship. Plenty of good food and wine, their only duty to produce children, which they did. If they could not, with the partner chosen, then the non-producing partners were changed. This changing was done after 3 months if results were not accomplished. The offspring were taken over by the government and cared for by them. The results of this experiment were so disastrous that the results were quietly stored away. Some of the results did come to light. Retardation was common, also deformity. Very few had above average stature, most were below. None were above average mentally, which confirms my belief that you cannot monkey with human nature. Nature demands and somehow arranges that all humans are different mentally and physically, and man himself cannot change this. Nature put humans on this earth, and it is. And in its own way, we will make certain that neither other human or other live things will erase them, as would be the case. Most certainly, if all humans were the same in all respects. Another reason for the difference in humans is that they, of all living things on earth, are by themselves the most helpless until they reach maturity. All other species of living things become self-supporting shortly after birth. Humans only pass on one thing or part of themselves to their offspring. That is, the same number of bones, not necessarily the same size, and joined together in the same matter as their own. The organs which control them, also only in the shape of their own, with the intention that they perform reasonably as nature requires. All other movable living things reproduce exact images of themselves. Each baby is born as an individual. How he lives, or what use he makes of his life, depends entirely on what use he makes of his brain. There is a tendency to blame much of his shortcomings on environment, teachings, circumstances, and conditions during childhood. This is only true in exceptional cases, mainly mental. Parents try their best to prepare their children for the future. With what success depends entirely on the child himself and how he uses that preparation. Whether he truthfully evaluates himself or goes on assumption, accepts others as he would have them accept him. Be honest. Sham gains little or nothing and is easily spotted. Society respects a wise leader and will follow, but are quick to damn a poor one. A doer, too, is respected and listened to. Society and friends, too, are eager to push the non-doer or non-conformist away and further down into the muck he has created for himself. Why such a big deal about society? Because society is our friends and the people who live around us, and indirectly pay our wages and help to make our life worth living. We have only ourselves to blame for our position in society. The body is willing. It's that glob of gray matter in the top of the head that does the directing. Don't blame someone else for your shortcomings. Put the blame or the credit where it belongs, yourself. In case you don't go along with my thinking and still want to blame someone else for your shortcomings, I will give you some of my parents' family background. 2, you will have an idea of who they are when I mention them in my memories. If you are a good detective, you might discover why I have done some of the things I have and why. All my grandparents were from United Empire Loyalist stock, extremely loyal to the British flag. I am not aware where the original families settled in Canada, but from the little I have learned leads me to believe those first settlers made their homes in what was later known as Shefford County in Quebec. This would be around 1780. Grandfather, as a young man, filed on a homestead in the heavy treed land 3 miles west of where Waterloo became a village. He cleared a small acreage and built a log house. Then he went back and married his boyhood sweetheart, Amelia Booth. They raised their 7 children on that homestead, and both lived there until they died. With the aid of his children, through their labors, he purchased another 320 acres adjoining his homestead, giving him a farm of 480 acres. At the time of my arrival, over 300 acres were under cultivation. Also, his interest in maple sugar caused him to purchase land up on the side of the mountain, which contained between 400 and 500 sugar maples. Altogether, his farm was one of the largest and best farms for miles. Aside from running expenses, all the money made from the farm was put back into it. As I remember, Grandfather Jones, he had white hair and a bushy white beard. He wore glasses, which sat low on his nose. He was wiry and a little bent, 5 foot 10 inches in his sock feet, and weighed 160 pounds. Tired at night, but never too tired to spend a little time with me on bed. A little time with me on his lap. He always had a bowl of hot bread and milk before going to bed. When there, I was allowed to share the bowl with him. He was gentle but stern, and when he looked over his glasses, everyone knew that was it. Stop right there. Breakfast and dinner were on time, but the day's work, chores, and everything had to be done before there was any supper. Grandmother was short and stocky, her gray hair done up in a bun at the back of her head. Her long black dresses just clear of the floor. She was a spotless housekeeper and a good cook. She didn't talk much, but when she did, what she said was right according to her. She was jealous of her children and their children, which did not help things where it concerned any others. She used her religion as a crutch, much to the disfavor of grandfather. She was very strict, and when anyone opposed her in any way, she put them entirely out of her mind with a shut-off that couldn't be broken. She expected everyone to come to her, share her thoughts and opinions, and agree or out. And when it came out, she meant exactly that, much to the embarrassment of grandfather, her children, and others around her. She often spoke without considering her words or how they would sound on or their effect. She never apologized. Her makeup would not allow that. I never heard Dad speak about her spanking her children. I guess she did. I guess she did. Anyway, she must have had practice to make it hurt so much before she started on me. I got lots of them. I guess I must have had them coming. Then I would get mad and proclaim in my loudest voice and sobs that she was the worst and meanest woman in the world and that I never wanted to see her again. But when the pain was gone, so was my proclamation, and I was back for her ginger snap men. Uncle Marshall, the oldest child, hated the farm. He packed his grip and headed for the States, where he worked as a bricklayer for a while. Then he joined the army. On one of their expeditions, he got malaria and died. Aunt Lydia lived to be 94. She married a Galbraith. He was killed in a logging accident, leaving her with one boy, Georgie. Though much older than I, we had many happy hours playing together. She then married an Ashton. The only thing I remember about her two Ashton boys was that Aunt Lydia would not let them play with their toys, so they could not be broken. They were kept stashed away in a drawer just to be looked at. Just maybe she was afraid that I might do to them if I got at them, and then made her keep them packed away while I was there. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't that rough on my toys. 9 were still good enough to pass on to my brothers. Then, too, I always had to share my toys. She had a lot of her mother's disposition, which did not help her any in her later life. Farming was not for Uncle George. He first worked as an assistant agent on the Central Vermont Railway, where he learned telegraphy. He settled in Waterloo, where he was agent for over 40 years. He took exceptional pride in his penmanship, and justly, too. He was never so busy that he could not find time to write wedding invitations, calling cards, and fancy announcements. They were a joy in their perfection. An auditor for the railroad once told me that if I searched through all his records over the years, I would not find a blot the size of a pinhead. A wonderful and satisfying accomplishment. He married Aunt Emma, my mother's closest and most intimate family relation. Eric, their oldest son, was a little younger than I. Our moving away did not allow us to be together for very long. Eric went into the ministry, finally gaining the position of president of the Seventh-day Adventist College. His hobby has been the collection of rare stones and artifacts and souvenirs from India, China, and most of the Eastern world. Don, the much younger son, has made a specialty of dentistry. He was a colonel in the dentistry department during World War II. Uncle Fred liked farming, but left the home place shortly after he became of age. He went to work on a farm in the States near Luverne, Minnesota. Later he purchased the farm and married the daughter, Winnie, of the previous owners. They had 2 boys, Paul and Neil. They came up to the homestead when we did. Paul was a railway engineer when he died. Neil became sales representative for Colgate Company. He lives in Toronto. We visit them in Toronto. Aunt Lily married Hallow Teal and left home when she was 22. Her first child, Liddy, a few months older than I, spent a lot of her younger years at grandfather's. We were playmates and shared grandmother's punishments. Her second child, Myrtle, 2 years younger, pretty and devilish as her mother. We shared a happy and hilarious 10 days posing as a married couple to the rest of our relations who were not well acquainted with her. I want to digress here for a bit. I may forget later. I had only been back from overseas 10 days when word was received that Grandma was failing fast. Dad and I left on the first train, but a blizzard, which tied up all the railway traffic out of Montreal, prevented us from reaching her bedside in time. Hardened to death by the war, my feet were itchy. The atmosphere of gloom had me about ready to blow my top when Myrtle came to my rescue. We found ways to break the spell, and the others went along with us. After the funeral, Dad decided to take another 10 days to visit old friends and relatives, as this would be his last trip east. I was agreeable, providing Myrtle came along to brighten up our extended vacation. She readily agreed. To add a little mystery and fun to our visiting, we decided that we should act and be introduced as husband and wife. Dad went along with the idea wholeheartedly and was quick to pull us out of the tight spots we got into. Not having received my discharge from the Army, I still wore my officer's uniform, which was a pretty snappy outfit. Myrtle, pretty neat and smart, wore her nice clothes perfectly. Together, we made a pretty snappy couple. I received my congratulations on my choice of bride. It is surprising to what length people will go to accommodate a newly married couple. We enjoyed it to the full. I believe Dad got the most fun of all. He enjoyed every minute of it, but kept us on pins because we never knew when he was going to pull something on us. Best of all was the disbelief on the faces of those we had fooled when they learned the truth. Especially those we allowed to go ahead and arrange our sleeping quarters. Myrtle would go to Dad's room and me in with Dad. When the hoax was revealed, creating laughter and Dad's funny comments. It was still just as funny when we recalled the incident 50 years later, when Myrtle and I met again. My dad was the 6th child in the family. He got his schooling in a little one-room schoolhouse, which was about 2 miles from his home. He had to leave to work on the farm when he finished grade 6, which at the time was considered educated enough to handle any job which he might have been offered. But as many men did in those times, they took advantage of every opportunity to increase their knowledge by studying whatever they were doing, to understand their work and give it their best, by learning all the ins and outs of their job. Dad read a lot and kept a dictionary handy when he was stuck on something. He was not what you would call a whiz with arithmetic, but it seldom got the best of him. Somehow he would find the right answer. But when it came to dollars and cents, beating him was something you just could not do. And when it came to figures around the farm and in the store, he was right on top. Dad was a lot like his father. He made friends easy, and I never heard many people say anything against him. Most of them who did were ones Dad had got the best of, and they couldn't take it. Dad believed that when you bested someone by fair or foul means, that the fellow's bad luck or bad dealings and you didn't remind him of his errors. Oh, Dad wasn't that perfect. He got taken too, more than once, not in figures, but in some of the deals he made. And I believe this was because he trusted many people that he called friends who were only friends for what they could get out of him. 2, Dad was a very proud man. He never went back on his word. I learned this when I was very young. If he said he was going to give one of us a licking, we got it. No changing his mind about that. I could not ask for a more loving father. He was a strong disciplinarian. When he said to do something, he meant it. And woe betide anyone who disregarded his orders. Be it one of us kids, or the hired man, or hired girl, or anyone else that he had authority over. The others got fired, but us kids got the strap. Being the oldest, I was often left in charge, and if things were not done properly, it was me that got the switch or strap. I often thought I got strappings that I should not have got, but believing Dad to be fair, I took them, which was something to make me more careful later on. I guess I deserved most of the ones I got anyway. I never felt any resentment against Dad, and I am quite certain that they helped me think more and think things out and understand more clearly what life was all about when it came time for me to go to it on my own. I mentioned that Dad was a proud man. He was stubborn, too. I truly believe that he knew that some of the deals he made were wrong, but when he had committed himself, he was too stubborn to admit it when his deals did not work out as he had first intended them to. Dad never liked being told he was wrong. He would either put up a strong argument which favored him or walk away and say nothing. I never heard him say, "I told you so," either. Perhaps because he did not like having the same said to him. He was a great storyteller, and he could really tell a story too. He was able to keep so many stored in his brain, it was a mystery to me. He could get a laugh out of his stories, even though the subject was not much of a laughing matter. Guess the secret was in the telling. My fondest memories are of Dad telling stories. No matter how bad the day or the times, his stories always brought a few laughs and at least made the outlook a little brighter. He had a hearty laugh, and every time he laughed, his belly went up and down like old Santa's does. He got a good laugh out of a story too. It was really something to watch. He could be telling a story and he would get to laughing, particularly if he was telling a story on somebody. The tears would be rolling down his cheeks, and then he would start coughing. It was really something just watching him. Dad liked to tell stories on the other guy. He didn't appreciate someone telling one on him. He didn't like to be the scapegoat either. As we were growing up, we had to be pretty careful Dad didn't see us laughing at some of the funny predicaments he got into. We got some good laughs at his expense along the way. Dad liked farming. He had things worked out a little different and gone more his way. I believe we would have made it okay. But had it went differently, and as he wanted it to, my life would have been different. And I would have missed a lot and be writing another story. Funny how things which you had no part in, can change the entire life of a person. Just because of the actions of one person, my grandmother, I could have grown up a Quebecer. I don't think I could have taken that. If there was nothing else, at least I have grandmother to thank for getting me out of Quebec. Uncle Henry was the youngest. His mother's pride and maybe joy. Anyway, he was no farmer. He preferred the wild life. His mother could always find an excuse for his absence from the farm, or for doing little on it. Through her, there was always money for his requirements, be they gambling debts or liquor or whatever. He had but to ask, and his request was granted. He stayed on the farm, or at least the farm was his home, until grandfather, worn out, died. Then it became his. He married the woman his mother had chosen for him. Their life together was not happy for either of them. Through his unconcern and mismanagement, the farm deteriorated to the poorest farm anywhere around at the time he died. I have learned that his son has taken over the old place and is gradually bringing it back again. I wish him every success. It will take a lot of hard work and money to get the old farm back to what it was as I remember it. Our herd of well-bred milk cows, which were all milked by hand. 20 driving and heavy work horses. A flock of around 50 sheep. It was one of my fond memories pulling away the fleece when Granddad finished shearing each sheep. I remember a cool, frosty morning. A bunch of men came to the farm. It was early, but Granddad had a big fire going under a big barrel to scald the hogs. It was a butchering bee. Some of the men caught the pigs, Granddad pointed out, then took them outside where they cut their throats and let them run until they died. There was no humane society in those days. They hauled them back to the steaming barrel and scraped the hair off. Then they hung them and cleaned them. They all went in for dinner. When they came out, cut the pigs in half, then up and hung them in the hayloft over the cow barn to cool and set. There were still a lot of the pigs left after the butchering was done. Grandma had a lot of chickens and took pails and pails of eggs to town every week. Katie and Murty Booth were in their teens when I first remember them. They were Dad's cousins and came to live with Granddad at an early age, getting their schooling, doing housework, and taking their place working the farm. It was their home. The old farm was akin of a model I had in mind for a farm I would like to have had someday. Dreams which were started too late in life to make come true never materialized. Grandmother spoiled all of her grandchildren, especially Marshall, my brother, and I, and also Aunt Lily's two girls, Lydia and Myrtle. She always wanted us to stay with her. That was fine with us until we did something she didn't like, and she couldn't get us back to our parents fast enough. Especially me, as we only lived across the road, about a quarter of a mile away. Not so with Aunt Lily's girls. Their home was some 15 miles away. If either one of them got out of line, it was usually a spanking and sent to bed for the rest of the day. But next day, it was all forgotten, and we were back in their good graces again. Being a little fellow and living so close to them, I was allowed to go to my parents whenever they went. They never told my parents they were taking me. They just said, "Come on," and I went. I didn't know any better. I wasn't old enough to realize it then, but from what my parents said, this going and coming caused them a lot of worry. Yet, if Mother or Dad said anything about it, Grandma got mad and wouldn't speak to them for a week or more. All of Grandfather's children had worked hard to make the home place the good place that it was. They worked from sun up to long after dark, doing everything there was to be done. Grandfather was a good manager and expected everything his children could give and more. He was a hard-working man and very strict. He expected the boys, or whoever helped him, to work just as hard as he did. He didn't slack himself. And he didn't want anyone else slacking either. I remember a long slang expression he always came out with. Gosh be damned! When he was put out about something. Having to work so hard on the farm, with little time to play, and little or no money when they needed, it was the reason for both the daughters and sons leaving home as soon as they could get away at the age of 21. Grandmother never seemed to be able to get along with her sons' wives, mostly because they never married the girls she had picked for them to marry. And her daughters' husbands, because they were from a different Christian faith than hers. Grandfather insisted that all his children and their families have Christian Christmas dinner with him. So they did. Unless they lived too far away to get home. There was no visiting back and forth at any other time. Grandmother, in her way, loved the grandchildren and wanted them with her, then spoiled them to the limit, to the dismay of their parents. I guess most grandparents do. My father was ready and anxious to get away on his own when he reached his 21st birthday, which was the 28th of July. It was the first day of the haying season. The crop was heavy. He loved the farm and could see the results of his own hard work. Under different arrangements and conditions, he would have stayed on the farm. He had talked with his father about arrangements for his staying on the farm without results. He was now 21 and could leave. But he realized that his leaving now, at the start of the heavy harvest, would be a heavy blow to Grandfather, particularly because during the later years, Grandfather depended more and more on him to carry out the work on the farm. So he stayed on until the harvest was finished. His mother argued with a vengeance against him leaving and gained nothing. Now that he was 21, she had no legal claim on him now. Being of age, he could argue with her and speak his mind to her without fear of retaliation, which had not been the case in the past. They were both on equal footing, and he could be as stubborn as she. Getting nowhere on threat, she changed her tactics and tried to make him come her way by making promises to change and make his request and life on the farm as he wanted it, and that his interests would be her greatest concern. All this without effect. Father knew from bitter experience that she broke her promises almost as soon as she made them, unless it was to her advantage to keep them. It was no different now. From the way she had used her promises in the past, she could not change now. He had made his decision to leave, and nothing she could say would change him. Not having gained her way, she changed to a vengeful mood, even going so far as to hiding some of his clothes and drawing his razor blade over a nail so that it would be useless. Harlow Teal, husband of Aunt Lily, Father's youngest sister, had a farm where he raised horses, mostly race horses. But his main business was buying and selling horses. He knew of Father's plan to leave home. He knew, too, that Father, though young, was a good carpenter. He had the material for his new home ready and was waiting for Father to come and help build it. So Father had a job to go to when he left home. It was well into the night when Father gave Grandma his final answer. He went to bed and was up as usual and had started milking before the others had come into the barn. Milking finished, they went to the house for breakfast. Grandmother had prepared breakfast and set the table for everyone except Father. Father sat down at the table in his regular place and bowed his head while Grandfather said the blessing. Then he stood up amid a deadly silence and went to his room to pack his things. Grandfather sat for a moment with bowed head, then pushed his plate away. He rose from the table and looked at Grandma. Tears filled his eyes. He squared his shoulders and with unsteady steps he walked to the door and softly opened it and went outside, slamming the door in disgust and anger at what had just taken place. He went to the barn and harnessed the young 3-year-old mare father had always taken care of, raising it from a tiny foal under tender and loving hands to be a show horse at the country fairs and a trotting horse with speed to spare, both on ice and on dirt tracks around the circuit. He hitched her to his own single buggy, then with the reins held firm and tight, waited for Dad to come out of the house. Unable to find some of his things, Father asked Mother if she knew where they were. She would not answer. He gave up looking further and packed what was left. Gathering his things together, he said, "Goodbye," to Mother. There was no indication on her part that both were in the same room. He knew by her actions that she was in another of her ill-tempered moods, which he was well acquainted with. So any further endeavor on his part to make his leaving more friendly would be useless. His pack bag over his shoulder and carrying his suitcase, he was walking up the lane towards the road when Grandfather called him. He went back. Grandfather handed him the reins and said, "She is all yours. You have earned her. Take good care of her. Go with my blessings, and do not let what has happened today keep you from coming home again." The mare was a prize, which Father had expected to leave behind. Slightly stunned and overjoyed at his father's gesture, he took the reins and got into the buggy. His heart was too full to say all he would like to say. Only 2 words, "Thank you," could get past his lips. His father stretched his hands toward him to wish him well. As he gripped it hard, a small roll of carefully folded bills was transferred to his hand. With only a quick glance at the folded money, he put it in his pocket, then looked straight and long into Father's eyes, hoping that he would say all that he wanted to say, but could not. As he drove away, he turned to wave. His father waved back. There was no sign of his mother. His leaving had not softened her heart. He and my mother were engaged, but the wedding date had not been set due to the uncertainty of his future employment and where he could make a home for his bride. Mother's parents, too, had had a large family of boys and girls, and like Father's brothers and sisters, had left home when they became of age. Mother, the youngest, was doomed to stay on the farm and look after her parents. With part-time help from a cousin, she did her best to keep the farm operation going. but milking 10 cows night and morning, and doing the other chores besides the land work was more than should be expected. A permanent farmhand was needed, but her parents felt they could not afford one, though the farm was gradually becoming run down through lack of repairs. The fences and buildings especially, no way could be found to help the situation, or so it seemed. It was a good farm and would give good returns if run properly, and the work done that was required. Mother was continuously tired out from overwork and had very little time to herself. To be able to spend any time with Mother, Father spent much of his spare time helping her on the farm. It should be mentioned here that Mother's father, a big man weighing 240 pounds, had been struck down with rheumatism so bad that he had to spend his time either in bed or sitting in a chair. His hips were swelled so badly that his legs remained crossed and could not stand up straight. The rest of his joints were swelled accordingly. To move about at all from chair to chair or to his bed caused a great deal of pain. This had been his lot since his late 40s. He was now past 60, mentally alert, though uneducated. Much of his time was spent in reading. Other than guiding the farm operation from his chair, he was useless as far as doing any of the work himself. Due to his condition, he was not a pleasant man to be around. Both Dad and Mother, having been raised on a farm, knew that a good farm could produce a good living, as well as a good profit, if farmed properly. Also, it meant long hours and hard work. Both felt they were equal to the demands, if it came to that. They were both young and wanted a change. Uncle Harlow's house would be finished in a month. They set the wedding date for then. They would move to Sherbrooke, where Father had already been promised a job in a cigar factory. Though anticipated, their announcement of the wedding and their plans set up a reaction by her family and parents. Mother leaving the farm meant the disposal of the farm and stock, with the result that the care of the parents would become the obligation of all the children, none of whom would willingly accept. Finally, through the insistence of Mother's brothers and sisters, who were willing to give up any share they might have in the farm, the parents agreed to turn the farm over to Mother and Dad when they were married, with the understanding that the parents would continue to live on the farm as long as they lived, and all their necessities supplied by Dad and Mother. The arrangements were not according to their plans, but due to the reluctance of the rest of the family to share in the care of the parents, both felt that the deal was good for them. So they accepted. Aunt Lucy, a sister next to Mother, but older, was a big woman and strong as an ox. She had the disposition of her father and the strength and determination to do as she wanted. She left home and married while still in her teens. The marriage did not work out. She pulled out of it and trained to be a nurse. She was working in the hospital at Sweetburg at the time of the wedding. She took time off to do the chores while Mother and Father took a few days away for a short honeymoon. In those days, religion was a very important fact in the daily lives of the family. Each church had its own followers and woe-betide outsiders. Each group considered the other groups as heathens. Different religions separated neighbors so that only minimum contact was allowed. Trust was an exception. Intermarriage, unthinkable. To cross the barrier was to become an outcast. Grandfather and Grandma Jones were Anglican and raised their family in the Anglican way, in the Anglican faith. While Grandma was a stickler in her religion, often expressing her views in the presence of others to the embarrassment of her husband and children, and driving would-be friends away. Because of this attitude, she had very few friends, even among those of the Anglican religion. Grandfather was a strong Anglican too, but his interpretation of the Bible and the teachings of Christ presented a much greater field for his actions and conduct than that expressed through his church. He often argued against the dogma of the church, so far as it concerned people or other denominations. His contention that all God-fearing people, regardless of the church they belonged to, were equal in God's light. It was not the church, but rather how each individual carried out the teachings of Christ in a Christian manner that mattered and made a Christian or not. Though Grandfather Jones never tried to push his interpretation of the Bible on others, what he believed, he lived up to. He was never so busy that he would not stop to help another who needed him. His table was full for the hungry, and when requested, his best advice was given freely. His word was as good as his bond, and his handshake as good as his signature. He was a very highly respected throughout the county. His friends came from many walks of life and different denominations, as well as his own church group. He judged a man not by his church, but by his sincerity, honesty, and conduct. In all, his was a good example to follow. His children must have thought so too. They all had a lot of friends. They were faithful to their church as their father. Each chose his life mate regardless of the church they belonged to. My mother's father, on the other hand, was a strong Presbyterian from the old school. He was an avid churchgoer before becoming crippled. He brought his family up accordingly. He was far from pleased when mother chose an Anglican rather than a Presbyterian for her husband. So, from the very start of their young lives together, they had to contend with the enmity between father's Anglican mother and her group, and mother's Presbyterian father and his group. Each group considered the other group to be heathens of the lowest class, and no amount of arguing convinced either group otherwise. The enmity between father's mother and mother's father prevailed as long as they lived, never allowing either child to forget what they thought of their choices of the other's mate. Mother had met Grandfather Jones some little time before at a country fair, also most of his brothers and sisters. Father attended all the fairs showing his father's stock or racing horses. If at all possible, Mother managed to join him. His father was a good stockman and also attended most of the fairs as one of the judges for the fair board. He was the first to congratulate and welcome Mother into the family. When he heard the announcement of the engagement, the sincerity of his welcome underwent the test several times, but he always took Mother's side. Mother's mother, as near to being an angel as one could be. She was of the Quaker faith. Her parents were from the settlers that came over to America on the Mayflower from Wales. Their religion was founded on the 10 Commandments of the Old Testament. Forgiveness, live and let live, and listen to his own. Come whatever, in sickness or in health, each and every day she took time to read her Bible. She lived to pass her 82nd birthday without missing a day of reading, even though she never wore glasses. She wore Quaker clothing only, a black dress and white apron. In the house, she always wore a small white lace cover on the top of her head. Outside, it was either a black or white sunbonnet, or a black shawl in winter. Her home was her castle. Her children, her willing subjects, who she guided with love and understanding. Friendship was second nature to her. She loved flowers and always had flowers in her home. During her illness, before she finally passed away, she was kept entirely surrounded with flowers by her many loving friends, children, young people, and grown-ups. She always said she would sooner have flowers where she could see them rather than on her grave. And friends made her wishes come true. She accepted her children's life mates as just more children to be added to her family, but too grown up to need her guidance, but still to be loved. She made no attempt to control or interfere with what went on outside, but inside she ruled as Queen Victoria did. She resembled Queen Victoria in her dress, statute, and deportment. She loved to sing and play the organ. She had a lovely voice, but would only sing hymns or children's songs. She had chosen her own life, come what may. She kept all her troubles, and she must have had many, and her sorrows within herself, asking no others to share them. She relied on her Bible for all the comfort she needed, keeping a neat home, tending her chickens, and working with the tall earthen churn to make choice butter, which her customers paid extra for, preparing a choice meal from the ingredients she had available. The comfort and care of her husband and children occupied her days. Shortly after Dad's 21st birthday, she had left the home to go it on his own. This left only Granddad, Uncle Henry, Murty, and Katie to run the farm. Uncle Henry was practically useless, spending most of his daylight hours at home in bed. Katie stuck it out for a year, then left to get married. Granddad was no longer a young man. The hard farm work was taking its toll. Dad loved the old home place and his father, so it is understandable that it did not take much coaxing to bring Dad back to the farm again. After 3 years away, under an arrangement agreed to by both grandmother and granddad, whereby Dad would work the farm with what help granddad could give and receive a salary on a percentage basis of the total income from the farm. Uncle Henry, having made no attempt to keep the farm up or take any interest in it, seemed to have no interest in what happened to it. Therefore, the agreement between Dad and his parents was made in good faith by all three. Both the land and the buildings were badly run down after 3 years of insufficient care. The milk cow herd had been reduced, as had the sheep and pigs. Dad worked hard to bring everything back up to the original setup. The agreement was for a 3-year period, at which time Dad was to get a greater share of the income, and with this extra money purchase the farm from Granddad and become the owner. This because of Granddad's age. By then, he would be ready to retire, but would have a good income to live on. The 3 years were up, and the farm was again paying well. Dad had been working under trying conditions. His wages had only been partly paid, and though he asked for a settlement several times, there was always excuses to hold his wages back. His family was suffering both in food and clothing and other necessities. He was at the end of his patience. Things were getting worse all the time. Grandmother was supposed to take Mother's list of things she wanted in trade for the eggs she sold, then charge it against Dad's wages. The lists were only partly filled. The excuse was that she didn't need. The excuse was that she didn't have enough eggs, or that Mother was asking for things she didn't need. It couldn't go on any longer. Dad wanted his full wages up to date right now, and his account brought up to date. He told her he couldn't keep his family going with the way she was handling his wages. Unless he was paid up in full, he would leave and quit the farm and work somewhere else. The farm was back in good order again and going along just fine. Grandmother thought she had Dad, where he would have to stay and work the farm. She had plans that Uncle Henry should have the farm as soon as he settled down, and she was going to keep Dad on, knowing Dad would keep the farm up and going until the proper time came for the transfer. By that time, Dad would have to take what she offered. At the accounting, Grandma denied that she had agreed to the arrangement in any way. Also, there was no money to pay Dad up because she had been lending, she called it, Uncle Henry money to pay his gambling and liquor debts, so there was none left. Grandfather could do nothing about the money. Dad had suspicions about where the money was going, and knew that unless there was a complete turnabout on Grandma's part, her baby, Henry, would get the cream and the rest would get only skim milk. It wouldn't go on this way. He wrote to Uncle Fred in the States about what was going on the farm and what the prospects were for him down there if he pulled away from the home place. Uncle Fred's reply was encouraging. Jobs for good, all-round workmen were not hard to get. Carpenters were badly needed. Dad was well qualified for this class of work, or if Dad wanted to rent a farm, he would help him get one, and they would work out the horses and machinery between them. Dad had Uncle Fred's letter in his pocket when he asked for an accounting. When Grandmother would not sign the agreement to first set out, or make different arrangements in handling the money, Dad told them he was through. Grandma just laughed and said he would have to stay. Dad showed her the letter. She blamed Uncle Fred for Dad's decision and put him in her black book as well as Dad. From that day on, the old home place went down and back down. Uncle Henry was no farmer. He married the girl Grandma picked for him, who came to the farm to live. It was not a happy marriage. I went to visit the old farm when I came back from the Second War. There was little to remind me of the good days when we lived across the road. Some of the buildings were gone. Others, a good wind would blow down. The old sugar bush had been left to grow wild. I learned later Uncle Henry sold it, as he did one of the quarters of the home place. When Grandma tried coaxing and threatening Dad to stay and failed, she knew she was the loser. She turned bitter and ordered Dad off the farm. A neighbor bought Dad's stock off his farm across the road, and Dad arranged for us to move into Waterloo, where he would stay until he got a place for us down in the States. Grandfather could do nothing to change the situation. He seemed a broken man and was sorry to have Dad leave. When Grandma said, "Get off the place," she meant it. So much that when it came time to move the furniture and us to Waterloo, she would not allow Dad to use one of the teams. A French neighbor took his team and gave Dad a helping hand to move. There was snow on the ground when we moved into town. I remember Mother having to sweep the snow off the steps before we could get into the house. There were only 2 rooms in this small house, but Mother made the best of it. Sister Irene was born in that house on the 31st of May, 3 months after Dad left for the States. Mother's father and mother could not look after their farm or get help, so they sold their farm and moved to Waterloo, only a block away from our house. There being lots of work for our nurse, Aunt Lucy moved in with them so she could take care of them when they needed it. She brought our little sister into the world and helped me with the housework until Mother was able to take over again. I said, "Help me do the housework." She did all of it. All I did was bring the groceries from the little store across the footbridge and see that my two brothers got dressed and undressed and into bed and stayed there. Dad had said before he left that I would have to be the man around the house and help Mother. I was only 5.5, and according to what Mother told me later on, I made my job of being a man a hell for my two young brothers until she got me straightened out. I recall quite vividly the night Irene was born. There were no phones and no one else to go for help. I had no idea what was going to happen. In those days, being pregnant was supposed to be a well-kept secret and a no-no until after the baby was born. That night, when Mother woke me and told me to hurry and get Aunt Lucy, I knew by her white face that she was sick. I scrambled out from between my two brothers. I pulled off my nightdress so fast I ripped off a button. With my waist unbuttoned and only one suspender holding up my short pants, I ran as fast as I could. I remember there was a full moon and the dark shadows grabbed for my bare legs. It seemed a long time, and I had run miles before Aunt Lucy answered my pounding on the door. She put on a robe and picked up the small satchel she always carried when she was out nursing. Then I pulled her all the way back home. Mother was lying on the bed. Aunt Lucy told me to go back to bed and go to sleep. I did as she told me, fast. No one argued with Aunt Lucy. She was a big woman, and I had learned from bitter experience that when she said to do something, you did it right then. The next morning, I found out what all the fuss was about when Mother turned back the sheet to reveal a tiny baby. There were lots of mice and some rats around, so Mother brought our big black house cat along when we moved to town. Just after the snow melted, the cat had a bunch of kittens. We were going to move to the States in a short time, so we could not keep the kittens. They were only a couple of days old when we found them in the woodshed. Mother told me that I was the man of the house. I would have to put them in a sack and drown them in the lake. And as we could not leave the mother cat alone when we went away, it would be best if I put her in the sack with the kittens and drowned them together. Mother knew best. So when she handed me a sack and a string, I put the tiny kittens in first, then caught the old cat and put her in with them. I decided I would drop the bag in the water from the center of the footbridge. The water was deepest there. The bag was heavy, but after I got it up on my shoulders, it was not too bad. It was about 4 blocks from our house in the middle of the bridge. And as I trudged along under the heavy load, I was thinking of all the rats and mice the old cat had caught, and what a good pet she was. By the time I reached the spot where I was going to dump the bag, I decided that she had been too good to be drowned. I decided to take her out of the bag and just drown the kittens. I got the string untied. Then it suddenly came to me that Mother had said, "Drown the old cat." I knew I had to do as Mother said. I would, but I had to give that old cat a chance. Then it hit me. I would dump the sack in the lake, as she said to do, but she would never know that I had left the top of the sack loose and only tied the string with one knot instead of a hard knot. If the cat tried, she could easily get the sack open and could swim to shore where she would be safe. It was late afternoon when I went to do the dirty job. And the next morning, the old cat was waiting on the doorstep. Mother was not very pleased and questioned me about what I had done. She was satisfied when I told her I put the old cat in with the kittens and dumped them in the lake exactly as she had told me to do. Her only explanation was that the cat must have scratched a hole in the sack to get out. I didn't argue. Aunt Lucy took the cat to her place when we left, giving that old cat another chance to climb up on our bed to play with us and go on living, gave me a warm feeling, which I've never forgotten, even when I've been with people. If I can lend a hand, I do.